No one could remember when they had first seen him. That should have been the first warning. The town of Black Ridge wasn't the sort of place where strangers went unnoticed. With barely 600 residents and one road leading in or out, people knew one another's routines as well as their own. The mail arrived every morning at 8. Mrs. Bell watered the flowers outside the bakery at 6:30. Sheriff Tomlin drove Main Street twice before lunch. If a new face appeared, everyone knew by breakfast. Yet when people were later asked about the quiet man, every answer sounded exactly the same. He's just always been there. No one could explain why. On Monday morning, 12-year-old Owen Mercer noticed him first. At least Owen believed he had. He was riding his bicycle to school when he saw a lone figure standing on the crest of Hollow Hill, nearly 2 kilometers away. The distance should have made him impossible to recognize. Yet Owen somehow knew he was looking at a man. The figure stood unnaturally still, not shifting his weight, not scratching his face, not adjusting his clothes. He simply stood, watching. Owen frowned. People weren't meant to stay that still. His father always joked that even statues moved if you stared long enough. Birds fluttered around the hill, wind bent the grass, clouds rolled overhead. Everything moved. Everything. Except him. Owen looked away to avoid a pothole. When he looked back, the man hadn't moved an inch. By lunchtime, he had almost forgotten about it. Children forget strange things easily. Adults learn to ignore them. That evening, old Mrs. Hadley mentioned the man over dinner to her husband. I saw someone up on Hollow Hill. Her husband buttered another slice of bread. Hunter? No. Hiker? She shook her head. He wasn't doing anything. What do you mean? He was just standing. Her husband laughed. Maybe he liked standing. She smiled despite herself. Maybe. The conversation ended there. It shouldn't have. Tuesday morning, the man was closer. Not much. Perhaps another few hundred meters. Now he stood beside an abandoned fence overlooking the old wheat fields. The distance made no sense. No one had seen him walk there. No footprints marked the damp ground after the night's rain. Several farmers later swore the mud had remained perfectly untouched. But nobody checked until afterward. People rarely investigate things that don't yet frighten them. By Wednesday, children had given him a nickname. The Quiet Man. Some laughed. Some waved. One boy even shouted across the valley, "Hey!" The figure never answered, never waved, never acknowledged anyone. He simply watched. The town continued as normal. The butcher sharpened knives. The mechanic repaired engines. The church bell rang at noon. Dogs barked. Life continued. But something subtle had begun changing. Birdsong became quieter. Nobody noticed at first. There were still birds, still sparrows, still crows. Yet every morning there seemed to be less sound, as if the forest itself had lowered its voice. Thursday. Deputy Harris decided to investigate. He parked his truck at the base of Hollow Hill and climbed toward the stranger. He carried no weapon, no sense of urgency, only curiosity. Halfway up the slope, he stopped. The man was farther away again, not by much, just enough that Harris frowned. He could have sworn he'd been standing beside the fence. Now he stood another 100 meters beyond it. The deputy rubbed his eyes. How? He kept walking. Again. The distance remained exactly the same. No matter how fast Harris climbed, the stranger never grew closer. It was like chasing the horizon. Eventually, Harris gave up. He looked back toward town. Black Ridge seemed oddly small, quieter than usual. He suddenly felt as though something behind him had leaned closer. Not physically, emotionally, like someone breathing directly into a memory. His skin prickled. Without turning around, he hurried back down the hill. Later, when his wife asked if he'd spoken to the stranger, Harris frowned. "I don't remember. Friday." Everyone noticed. The man had reached Miller's Field. Less than a kilometer from town. He was still motionless, still facing Blackridge, still watching. Nobody had seen him arrive. Nobody had seen him walk. Yet every sunrise, he was closer. Sheriff Tomlin finally drove out himself. He stopped beside the field, stepped from his truck, placed one hand on his belt. "Morning." Silence. "You lost?" "Nothing." The sheriff sighed. "You can't just stand out here forever." No response. The sheriff took several cautious steps forward. For the first time, he could clearly see the stranger's face. Or rather, he couldn't. It wasn't blurred, it wasn't hidden. It simply refused to stay in focus. Every time Tomlin looked directly at it, his eyes slid away, and like trying to remember a dream while waking. The man's suit looked decades old, black, perfectly clean, not a wrinkle. His shoes shone despite standing in wet earth. His hands hung loosely by his sides. His skin looked almost gray, not dead. Just drained. Tomlin swallowed. "Sir?" Silence. The sheriff stepped closer. 20 meters. 15. 10. Something inside him screamed, "Don't." Not fear. Instinct. Ancient. Primal. The same feeling that once warned distant ancestors not to re-enter certain caves, not to drink from certain rivers, not to look too long into the darkness beyond the fire. Tomlin stopped. His breathing had become shallow. The stranger had still not moved. Yet somehow, the sheriff knew, with absolute certainty, that the man knew everything about him, his childhood, his marriage, his regrets, every lie he'd ever told, every shame he'd buried, every cruel thought he'd never spoken aloud. He felt seen, not observed, measured, judged. Tomlin backed away without realizing it. When he reached his truck, his hands were trembling. He never filed a report. He simply wrote, "Nothing suspicious observed." That night, every dog in Blackridge began barking at exactly 2:17 a.m. Every single one. Then, all at once, they stopped. The silence afterward felt wrong, not peaceful, empty, as though the sound itself had been removed from the world. Saturday morning. The quiet man stood beside the welcome sign entering town. Nobody had seen him move. Nobody had heard footsteps. He simply was, watching, waiting. And for reasons none of them could explain, every resident of Blackridge suddenly felt the overwhelming certainty that he wasn't coming to the town. He had always been there. It was the town that had been slowly moving toward him. By Sunday morning, Blackridge no longer felt like the town people remembered, and the streets were the same. The houses hadn't moved. The church still stood at the top of Oak Street, its weathered steeple piercing the gray morning sky. Yet everything seemed off. People spoke more quietly. Children stopped playing outside before sunset without being asked. Even the wind had changed. It no longer rustled through the trees. Instead, it drifted between them with the slow, careful patience of someone walking through a library. No birds sang, not one. Sheriff Tomlin was the first to disappear. His patrol truck was found idling outside the town hall. The driver's door stood open. His coffee was still warm. His hat lay neatly on the driver's seat. There were no footprints, no blood, no signs of struggle. Only one thing seemed strange. Every photograph in his wallet had turned blank. His wife's, his children, even his own graduation picture. Just white paper, as if those moments had never happened. People searched the woods until dusk. Nothing. The quiet man hadn't moved. He still stood beside the welcome sign, watching. Monday morning, Mrs. Bell vanished. She had been kneading bread. The dough remained half-finished. Her apron still hung around the chair. Her husband swore he had only stepped outside for a minute. When he returned, she simply wasn't there. By Tuesday, everyone knew someone who had disappeared. No screams, no violence, no evidence. Just absence. The kind of absence that leaves no hole because reality quietly convinces itself the missing person never mattered. That frightened Owen more than anything. His classmates no longer spoke about Sheriff Tomlin. It wasn't that they refused. They genuinely struggled to remember his face. Teachers forgot to call his name. His office became an empty room. By Wednesday, the sheriff's nameplate had disappeared from the building. No one had removed it. It had simply ceased to exist. Owen ran home. "Dad?" His father looked up from repairing an old radio. "What is it?" "Don't you remember Sheriff Tomlin?" His father frowned. "Who's Tomlin?" Owen's stomach dropped. That night, he dreamed. He stood inside a city larger than planets. Buildings stretched into impossible angles that folded inward like broken reflections. The sky wasn't above him, it surrounded him. Millions, no, billions of silent figures stood in endless rows, each one perfectly still, facing the same direction, watching something too enormous to comprehend. None of them blinked, none of them breathed. Then, one turned. It wasn't the quiet man, it was his father, gray-skinned, expressionless, standing perfectly still, watching. Then another turn. Mrs. Bell, then Sheriff Tomlin, then faces Owen didn't recognize. Thousands, millions, watching him, not with hatred, with expectation. He woke screaming. Tuesday evening, Owen made a decision. He would speak to the quiet man, alone. If everyone else was forgetting, he had to remember. The sun was setting when he reached the welcome sign. The quiet man hadn't moved. Not once. Owen stopped several meters away. His voice shook. "What do you want?" Silence. "What are you doing here?" Nothing, then. Very slowly, the man tilted his head. It was the first movement anyone had ever seen him make. A sound escaped his mouth, not speech, more like stones grinding beneath an ocean. The sound became words. His voice seemed to come from everywhere except his mouth. "Have been..." The air around Owen became heavy. "Watching." His ears rang. "Since..." The trees leaned toward them. "Before..." The stars appeared long before sunset. The ground rippled beneath Owen's feet. "Son?" Everything became silent. Even his heartbeat was born. Owen couldn't breathe. His mind tried desperately to understand the sentence. It refused. His thoughts slid away from it like water over glass. The quiet man continued. "You call this..." He looked around slowly. "A town." A long pause. "It..." Another pause. "Is..." Longer still. "A doorway." The sky split open, not physically, conceptually. The stars rearranged themselves into shapes that no human brain was built to perceive. Constellations became eyes, not symbols, not patterns. Eyes. Watching. The moon unfolded like flower petals. Behind it, something moved. It wasn't a creature. Calling it a creature would imply it belonged to biology. It was scale itself. An intelligence so vast that galaxies clung to it like dust motes floating through sunlight. It had no beginning, no ending, only impossible geometry stretching forever. Owen suddenly understood why the quiet man had seemed so motionless. Compared to that, movement had no meaning. The quiet man spoke again. "I do not come." His gray eyes met Owen's. "I wait." Images flooded Owen's mind. Thousands of worlds, millions of civilizations. Each believing they were unique. Each believing the quiet man had arrived. Each making the same mistake. The quiet man never hunted, never chased, never conquered. He simply stood. Worlds eventually drifted toward him, like leaves floating toward a drain. Every disappearance, every forgotten face, every erased photograph. He wasn't killing them. He was remembering them, taking them back into something infinitely older than existence itself. The universe wasn't expanding, it was falling, slowly, silently, toward him. Owen fell to his knees, his nose bled, his eyes watered. He laughed. He couldn't stop. Not because anything was funny, because his mind had reached the only place left beyond terror. Madness. Back in town, people began walking. Not running, not sleepwalking, walking, calmly, peacefully. Every resident stepped from their homes at exactly the same moment. No one spoke. Children held their parents' hands. Old couples smiled gently at one another. They walked toward the welcome sign, toward the quiet man. Owen watched them come. His father, his mother, his teachers. Every neighbor he'd ever known. None of them looked frightened. They looked relieved. One by one, they stopped, perfectly still, facing the same direction as the quiet man, watching. Owen tried to scream. No sound came. He looked around wildly. The entire town had become a forest of silent people. Hundreds of unmoving figures, waiting, watching, exactly like his dream. The quiet man stepped forward for only the second time. He stood beside Owen. Then, he smiled. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who had watched stars ignite and fade for longer than time had possessed a name. "You remember?" Owen nodded weakly. The quiet man looked toward the heavens. "Can rest." His body began to crumble. Not into ash, into darkness. A darkness deeper than night. As the last fragment disappeared, another figure appeared at the opposite end of town, standing perfectly still, facing outward, watching the road. Owen stared. His breathing stopped. The figure was him, 12 years old, hands hanging loosely at his sides, expressionless, silent, watching. His own body remained where it was, frozen, unable to move, unable to blink, unable to look away. Far away, beyond the stars, something impossibly vast opened one ancient eye, satisfied. 23 years later, a truck driver passing through the abandoned remains of Black Ridge reported something unusual. The town had been empty for decades. Nature had reclaimed almost everything. The houses had collapsed. The church roof had caved in. Trees grew through the old streets. There was no sign anyone had ever lived there. Except near the rusted welcome sign stood a man, perfectly still. Perhaps 35 years old, hands by his sides, watching the highway. The truck driver slowed for a moment. He considered stopping. Instead, he kept driving. In his rearview mirror, the man never moved. But somehow, he looked closer. The end. Thank you for listening to The Quiet Man. If this story left you glancing over your shoulder or questioning the silence outside your window, then The Quiet Man may already be watching. If you enjoyed this tale of psychological and cosmic horror, please consider leaving a like, sharing it with fellow horror fans, and subscribing for more original stories, dark fantasy, and eldritch nightmares. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next descent into the unknown. Until next time, if you happen to see someone standing perfectly still in the distance, whatever you do, don't stop to look twice.